it's not about heroics improving your health. It's about the little decisions that you make every single day to do the thing that is slightly more uncomfortable, that is slightly more challenging, to literally and metaphorically take the stairs every single time.
Welcome back to the Fitt Insider podcast. I'm your host, Joe Veneri. Today I'm joined by Michael Easter, author of The Comfort Crisis. In this episode, we talk about the value of doing hard things. Michael warns against obsessing over health wearables and wellness routines. Plus, he explains the 2% rule for living a healthier, happier life. Let's get into it. The Fitt Insider podcast is brought to you by Jack Taylor, our exclusive PR partner. More than just PR, they're creative storytellers and brand builders who actually understand the health and wellness industry. Learn more and get in touch at jacktaylorpr.com. Hi, Michael. Welcome to Fitt Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me, man. I'm excited to be here. Should be fun.
Yeah, likewise. I'm also super excited for the conversation today. I think, selfishly interested in your work, but also taking a lot of the things that you talk about, write about, think about, and just kind of apply them in my own life anyway. So when I came across the Comfort Crisis and started digging into the research as well, I was like, this seems to solve a lot of the problems that we encounter as a society and health issues and mental health. So a ton of implications, I think, for this audience and more broadly. But maybe to kick things off, just give us your background, and then I think we'll kind of delve into the book and some of the research you're doing.
Sure. Yeah. So my background is I was a editor at Men's Health magazine for a bunch of years in my 20s, from the time I was about, 22 to maybe 30. And then I took a job as a professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So my current job is that I still teach there as a professor, but the majority of my job is continuing to write. So if I were like a biology professor, the other half of my job would be being in the lab doing research. But because I'm in the journalism department, my job is to continue to write, to go out in the world and do books and stuff. So now I focus most of my attention on books. And I wrote a book called The Comfort Crisis that you mentioned and have read. And then I got another one coming out in September called Scarcity Brain. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. It's, when you think about, so I don't know that I've talked about this on the podcast actually, but back in the day, I was at one point freelancing for a lot of health and fitness magazines. I mentioned when we were corresponding via email, I probably pitched you and have at times written for Men's Health and all the variety of places. So I think our paths probably crossed previously. But there's this, when you think of Men's Health, it's like guy on the cover, shirt off, 6-pack abs, and thinking about not only some of the more technological kind of advancements, but also hacks and tips and tricks. And then the work that you're doing now, which is like almost the opposite of that, which is like sustainable, common sense, back to basics. How did that idea even come into your mind, focusing kind of on those attributes versus like maybe some of the things that people typically think of when they think of like quote unquote fitness industry?
Yeah. It's very simple. It's just through life experiences and also my time at Men's Health, I basically made the observation that anything that we do in the health and wellness area, and frankly, most things that improve your life, you often have to go through discomfort to get that benefit. You have to go through short-term discomfort to get a long-term benefit. Yep. So if you want to improve your fitness, you'll be uncomfortable because you're going to have to exercise. Exercise is uncomfortable, but then you improve afterward. Same deal with if you want to lose weight, you're probably going to be hungry at some point along the way. Hunger is uncomfortable, but you'll probably improve some health markers if you're overweight and you lose weight, right? Even mental health, you have to ask yourself some hard questions. You sometimes have to go through some stuff to come out on the other side better. Yeah. And so with that in mind, I just started thinking about comfort and discomfort and how the concept of comfort has changed over the last century, 1,000 years. 10,000 years, 100,000 years. And, our ancestors, they evolved in these environments that were very uncomfortable. Food was scarce. You had to move around all day to find food. You were always moving. So we developed basically as a species, we developed this drive to always do the next most comfortable, easy thing. And that kept us alive throughout time. And then our environment started changing very rapidly, right? And now we kind of live in a world where you don't have to necessarily move around all that much to stay alive. You don't have to work for food. You don't necessarily even have to worry about the elements because we all live indoors. You don't have to spend time in nature. Most people, like, with eating, it's like we have food everywhere. And so we've inserted comfort into our life in a lot of different ways. And it's great in the grand scheme of time, but it also has side effects, right? So this is a basic mismatch phenomenon. And so the book really explores all the ways that that mismatch manifests itself in our life, I would say, because I think, at the end of the day, like, I love the quick tips and tricks and tech and stuff, but at the end of the day, like, changing yourself, you're actually going to have to take action, and it's probably not always going to be easy. And if it is easy, it's probably not going to work, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's one of those things that gets lost in that conversation. Like all these things, technology hacks, like all the things that kind of evolve, equipment, like even in person coaches, like everything ultimately is like a tool in the toolbox. But I think a lot of times we forget to include the part that's like, oh, by the way, you're still going to have to do the work and you're still going to have to get comfortable being uncomfortable and kind of suffering and putting the time in. And so, for myself, like growing up playing sports and then getting into fitness and then endurance sports and now just maintaining that lifestyle, it's like that's the embedded through line where it's like, yeah, I've kind of embraced like this isn't going to be a ton of fun. In fact, that's the part I enjoy about it, right? It's like I'm looking for that. I'm seeking it out and trying to find ways where, hey, how do I get myself out of this comfort zone in a way where I can clear my head? I can actually kind of connect with some intuition or my body or what have you. And so I think, yeah, trying to embed that in the conversation. And obviously, your work does that where it kind of starts from that point and builds from there. In your case, on a hunting trip, right? And kind of backcountry, Arctic, crazy circumstances and terrain. When you set out on that kind of journey, that experience, was the idea then like, I'm doing this, like you said, kind of being in the field as part of this broader research, knowing you're writing this book? Or was it you're on this journey and then you kind of make that connection? How did that come about in terms of the timeline?
Yeah. So yeah, as part of the book, like to sort of look as a way to tell the story of how we've removed comfort or we've removed discomfort from our lives. The through line of the book is this 33 days I spent in the Arctic on a backcountry hunt. And so as I'm experiencing different forms of discomfort there, I then sort of dive into the science of them. And I talk about like how we've taken them out of our lives. What are the benefits of putting them back into your life? And I would say, when it came to the book, the book got purchased by a publisher and I hadn't taken the Arctic trip yet. So I had to submit a proposal but I was kind of just thinking, here are some things I'm going to experience. And like, I knew I was going to be having to move around all day, right? Like, we're going to have to carry all the stuff to survive on our backs the whole time. I'd been hunting enough to know that I was going to be hungry because you can't like pack in a buffet of food. You're packing in like 2,000 calories a day, if that, and you're probably burning double that, right? But there was a lot of stuff that happened out there that I didn't expect and that wasn't in the proposal. So, for example, when I got up there, I mean, you're more than 100 miles from anyone. And it was so freaking quiet, like unbelievably silent. Like if you just stop walking and stand, you start to hear your heart just boom, 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 boom. You start to hear the blood like running into your brain, right? That was interesting because it was also like very calming to be in that sort of silence. At first, it freaked me out. I'm like, this is weirding me out. But then you really calm down. And so then when I got home, it's like, oh, that's like something interesting I didn't expect. And so I had a lot of those things like silence, things like being totally in solitude, things like we don't face the life cycle as much anymore, right? We're not like as intimate with death as we used to be. And so there were all these little things that sort of popped up along the way and definitely surprised me. So I think that is like sort of pulling back because I mean, you guys are talking a lot about like the business of fitness and like how we think about fitness. I don't think you can understand something really well until you're willing to go have experiences. Like I could have written this book like from behind the desk and like not done the thing. And it could have just been like the standard, like, here's some anecdote from history and whatever. But if I don't do that Arctic thing, I'm missing like half of the most interesting parts of the book that were like the most enlightening things, right? And so I do think that there's a benefit, especially when we think of like media around health and fitness, to be able to like fully understand what we're saying. I think it pays to kind of sometimes get out in the world, you know?
Listen, that fully kind of resonates with me. I think what we try to bring to the coverage, the newsletter, the podcast is like we came up in the industry, like physically on the ground, training people one on one, working in group fitness classes, moms, grandmas, kids, elite athletes, ourselves training at various points in time. And now trying to always kind of circle back to that firsthand experience of like, hey, this app or this technology or this approach or what have you, that we're typically getting presented as like, you know what, for the person who's actually trying to make a change, going from zero to becoming active or dieting, or it's like, it's not going to work because I know I was there with them, like in the gym, trying to figure this stuff out. And I think in terms of what you're doing now, it's so important because, like you said, even you had the proposal and this idea of like, hey, maybe this is how it's gonna play out. And like even the things you thought you couldn't have predicted, the experiences you had when you did that. And I'm sure that led you down rabbit holes of research that then again opened other doors and started, kind of filling that book and potentially even, we'll talk about this at some point too, but like led to the second book, which is like, oh, these are even more ideas that, I want to continue to pursue. But coming back to the idea, even around, whether it's hunting or exercise or just generally being in the outdoors, how now are you like incorporating these things into your everyday life, whether that's, this idea of suffering or solitude or, struggle? How is that impacting you and how do you kind of continue to integrate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I learned in reporting the comfort crisis is just the insane benefits of spending more time outdoors and especially exercising outdoors more. So I live on the edge of
Mm.
the desert, and I mean, if I just give you like a very rough comparison, like if I'm exercising in a gym, all exercise is great. Don't get me wrong. But if I'm on a treadmill and running, I'm basically, I'm working my cardiovascular system, great. But there's a lot of things that are missing from that the outside inserts, right? So if I'm running on a trail, the trail is rocky, it's unpredictable. I'm having to also calculate foot placement as I'm moving. I'm having to factor in things like the trail is always changing. Like, am I going to push hard here? Am I going to slow down? What about this descent? Like, what's the angle here? Is it, are there cactuses on the side of the trail? You're also out exposed to the elements, which adds in another factor. And even the fact that, like, if I run 3 miles out, I got to run 3 miles home. I can't just stop. And there's also just so much research coming out now about just the psychological benefits of exposure to nature, different doses of nature. So I talk about this concept in the book called the nature pyramid that sort of lays out like how much time bare minimum you should be spending in different types of nature for a series of different mental health benefits. So I think for me, it's really taught me that like I need to be spending more time outside. I should be exercising outside more than I was. And also along in the process of reporting the book, when I was we were hunting, and so like you have to pack out the animal, and it's like everyone's read Born to Run, right? And so it's like humans are evolved to run long distances, blah blah blah. And why did we run long distances? Well, it's because we would use it to hunt. We would do this thing called persistence hunting, where we'd run the animal down basically, and then eventually spear it. But after we kill the animal, then what do? You got to carry the thing back home, right? And so I started going down the rabbit hole of carrying. And in the book, I argue we're actually more so evolved to carry weight over distance. We're the only animal that can carry weight over a significant distance. And it really shaped us. Not only did it allow us to carry meat home, but people carry children. People, when you're gathering is just walking out and bringing food back in your hands. It allowed us to carry tools, and tools allowed us to eventually sort of take over the world as a species. And I still think that it's a really important form of exercise for the average person because when you're carrying, you're not only working your cardiovascular system because you're covering ground, you're also working your strength system because you're carrying weight, right? So I write a lot in the book about rucking, but there's all different types of ways you can carry. And so I definitely do a lot more rucking. I do a lot more carrying in my workouts and really just trying to look, I'm not one of those people who's like super paleo, like if it wasn't around, like I'm not that at all, but I do think that what humans evolved to do can inform us in the present. It can be a decent guide. I'm not saying everyone go eat only meat and blah blah blah. Like a lot of that stuff is BS, but I do think that it's a good general starting place to think about how we should behave now.
Hey everyone, we'll get you back to the show in just a second. But first, I wanted to tell you about our exclusive PR partner, Jack Taylor. Honestly, this one's a no-brainer. We've known the Jack Taylor team for years. They work with some of the most innovative health and wellness companies. We're talking Whoop, Athletic Greens, Hyperice, and many more. Jack Taylor has an extensive industry network, knows how to work with high-growth companies, and really invests in building long-term relationships. I know this firsthand because they're Fitt Insider's PR agency, so I can confidently recommend them, and I do all the time. From startups to more established brands, they go beyond pushing product to help companies truly thrive. If you want to learn more, head to jacktaylorpr.com and tell them Fitt Insider sent you. Now, back to the show. Absolutely. It's so Jason from GoRuck has been on the show and he's an awesome guy. And thinking about, if people don't know, can check out that episode, but basically the idea of, they make pretty incredible backpacks kind of coming out of a military background to ruck, which is basically weighted walking over long distances. And that idea alone is something that's so simple that I think even myself, who, I try to program my weeks and months of workouts and make sure I'm hitting various goals and milestones. I'm just like, listen, on Sundays, I need to spend as much time outside walking, hiking, moving, carrying as I can. Some taken from your book, but also from Jason and, what folks like Andrew Huberman are talking about. Like, it really doesn't have to be much more complicated than that. Like, get out of breath, be outside in the sun, keep moving, and ideally condition yourself to kind of be comfortable with that feeling. It's something that I think about with whether it's your research or some of these maybe more basic but straightforward ideas. Things come to mind like Michael Pollan when he was doing all the kind of writing around food and eating a simple kind of diet, or even what like Ryan Holiday's done, right, with like stoicism and talking about these philosophies, and in some ways you're doing with kind of physical activity and discomfort. It's like there's the research and the writing and the practicality of it, and like distributing these ideas in a way that it resonates with many more people. But then there's the, like, how do we get this to like the behavior change standpoint where people are learning and maybe reframing their focus of health and fitness because of the work that you're doing, or nutrition because of maybe what Michael Pollan has done. Do you think about like that kind of next step beyond like doing the work, selling the book, and then like, how do we maybe ingrain this in terms of like behavior change or changing minds?
In the book, it's like I go to the Arctic to like learn all this stuff, but I am not suggesting the average person go do anything as insane as that. I just needed a good way to really be removed and think about this information, be exposed to discomfort. And also I needed a damn good story to tell a good story in a book. But what I think about it day to day is I think about it as being what I call a 2%er. So one of the studies that I came across in the book as I'm reporting it that like totally changed my mind about exercise and kind of how I see health is it found that only 2% of people will take the stairs when they also have the option to take an escalator. That is how wired we are to do the next most easy, most comfortable thing. 100% of those people know that they would be better off long term if they took the stairs, but they didn't. Is it really that hard to take the stairs, though? I would argue it's not. So I think that really it's not about heroics, improving your health. It's about the little decisions that you make every single day to do the thing that is slightly more uncomfortable, that is slightly more challenging, to literally and metaphorically take the stairs every single time that you have the opportunity, right? Because, and when you look at research in like, even in the fitness realm, people who just move more throughout the day, like gain a lot of just incidental physical activity just across the day, they can burn up to 800 calories a day. That's like running 8 miles. Because one of the problems that we face in the fitness world, I think, is that we've started to view exercise as this thing that we insert into our life that is removed from our life. So it's like you wake up, you roll out of bed, you drive to the office, you sit at the chair. After work, you got this like 30-minute class. Then you go home and you watch Netflix, right? And I think that although I will say that a person who does that is way better off than the person who doesn't, I think that that framing has taken away some of the benefits of exercise, has made it this sort of thing, has shifted our mindset to it being this thing that shouldn't be part of our lives. It's this extra little thing that maybe I'll do, maybe I won't do, et cetera. And so if we can think about ways of just like moving more throughout the day, I think that that's much more sustainable and also more approachable. Like if I say, hey, you got to go to, I don't know, some like cycling class where there's crazy music and everyone's like yelling like that, that's kind of like, that's a big step. But if I'm just like, hey, what if you just parked in the farthest space away? What if you just carried your groceries and all this shit? It seems totally straightforward. And guess what? It is. But guess what? It works. So why the hell aren't you doing it? Right? People don't do that. And so I think taking that 2%er mindset and applying it to not just exercise, but also how we eat, how we spend our time, how we spend our attention, all these different ways. I do think that that can be a good hack for people. I'm not saying it's going to work for everyone, but I have a newsletter called the 2% newsletter, and I write about this stuff like every week. And it definitely works for a lot of people. So yeah, that's kind of my soapbox.
Yeah, mine as well. And that's what I was gonna say. Check out the newsletter. We'll make sure it's linked, kind of in the show notes and everything like that. And even the framing of where that comes from and that approach that the right thing to do, but we're still not doing it, or we're not doing it often enough. And we've taken exercise and made it into like a foreign thing that somebody needs. You need a coach, you need a membership, you need all these different kind of overly complicated programming and goals. Yeah, it makes it just unattainable, obviously, and in some ways by design, right? So that you can pay somebody to teach you how to do it, or pay for something to learn and keep up with it. Kind of meanwhile, the most natural thing that we do is get outside, move around, walk, and just go about our business, and making that a way of life ultimately is what you're saying, and having that kind of commitment. It's interesting that you mentioned that as well, because that there's like this next jump to now using technology to like quantify everything. We're wearing all these different devices to figure out not only our steps and heart rate, but heart rate variability and glucose, and you kind of name it, we're trying to track it. It's starting now, and I think we'll probably write about it in the next couple weeks, but this like pushback against optimization, against the idea of trying to quantify everything, maybe the idea that you're becoming less in tune with your body by having all these different, kind of metrics that are telling you how you're feeling instead of you knowing how you're feeling. Has that kind of crossed your radar to this point? And maybe how do you think about some of the technology, even beyond like maybe the equipment or the programming, but just like wearables and health tracking, quantified self?
Yeah. So it's funny you bring this up because I actually have a whole chapter on this in my next book. And it's not just I apply it to not just health stuff. I apply it to health stuff, but I apply it to like a lot of different things. Basically, I think that what happens when we start to quantify and put numbers and data behind stuff and gamify things is that it captures our values. So it changes the nature of why you're doing what you're doing. I can come back on and talk more about that when the book comes out. I don't want to, my editor will call me if he's like, you just spilled the entire chapter. But so the way that I think of that kind of stuff is we really need to think about it as just another tool that can inform us, but it shouldn't like determine everything we do,
Mm.
And I do think that less is more. It's like I've used all sorts of different bands and say, I mean, just because I was an editor at Men's Health, and like honestly, the most useful metric that I've ever found is just step count, because it just tells me, okay, how much am I generally moving across a day? I know how it's going to change. A lot of this stuff is just like it goes into this like ether of algorithms, and I'm just like, well, like where the hell are these numbers coming from? Because they're all like based upon very flawed human decision and data. Step count's not as much, and even if it's slightly off, it's like, well, if I just get the high one every day, I'm probably going to be okay. So I think that That's kind of a long, rambling way of saying that I do think that there's a lot of utility in these tools helping us become aware of our behaviors, because if you can measure it, you can manage it. At the same time, we can't become so reliant on those that like determines everything for us. We have to realize that like there's a lot of flawed assumptions that go into this kind of stuff. Nothing is perfect, and we have to keep our eye on the ball of like, people will be like, you're like, okay, why'd you buy this, band or whatever? They're like, I want to get healthy. It's like, okay, well, how do you define health? And they're like, oh, like, I don't know. It sure as shit isn't some like random like fitness count number that the band gives you. Like no one goes, oh, I define health as getting like a score of an 11 on my band. Like no one says that. Right. So we have to remember, why do you want to get healthy? It's usually some reason like, I want to be able to play with my grandkids better and not get winded. Okay, well, let's keep our eye on that ball. As long as this band is helping you do that, we're good. But if it starts to steer us away from that, then what are we doing here?
Yeah. I think that too, you kind of touched on it before when you were talking about, exercise, and that you get in your car, you go to the office. After this, go to the spin class, and then you get into this kind of routine, and maybe exercise fits into that and maybe it doesn't. I think it was maybe this week or maybe even today, you were writing about like the idea of the routine and the morning routine, and maybe even being like over optimized as like really not being what everybody makes it out to be, in terms of, you see these kind of hustle culture, like 4 a.m. wake up, cold plunge, meditate, journal, like doing the same things over and over the same way. Does that, this quantification aspect and maybe that leading us astray, do you think of routines in that like same bucket in terms of, hey, let's make sure that we're actually doing this for the reason we set out to do it and it's moving us forward?
You're going to get me on another rant. Good God. um, I don't have a problem with morning routines so long as we're clear with ourselves about what they're doing for us. The idea that like if I do these like 7 health and wellness steps to optimize myself to like be a business person, it's like, no, what actually improves being a business person is doing business. Let's not kid ourselves that like, whatever, you drink some green juice and you take a cold plunge. Literally, that's not doing anything to sell product. Right. So I don't care if you're like, I take a cold plunge and I drink green juice because like it makes me feel good. It's a health and wellness thing that I'm for. But the idea that like if you optimize your morning with a bunch of random stuff that is totally unrelated to your main goal is going to help you achieve your main goal, that is a superstitious behavior. So in the newsletter that you reference, see, hear the tone of my voice. You got me going. Um, in the newsletter you reference, like to me, it is no different than a baseball player who steps up to the mound, pulls on his hat like 5 times, switches his gum 4 times, and then thinks that that is going to help him hit a home run. It's like, there's no difference there. Superstition is just thinking that one behavior that is unrelated to another is causal to it. It's the same thing to me. And so I think that sometimes like that stuff sounds good in theory, but a lot of what I try and do in my work is fact check that. And I'm not trying to be someone who's like, you're wrong. What I'm trying to tell the reader is like, what if you didn't have to do all that stuff? Right. Because if we're basing this behavior on invalid assumptions, that's probably not good. And the problem is that people can become fragile with a lot of random routines that they become superstitious about. So there's research that says when people can't go through their routine, they get flustered. It ruins the rest of their day. It tanks their performance. You think about military people, it's like the military literally wants a soldier to be able to get up in the middle of the night and just kick ass. Like imagine if we were like, okay, you have to do these 7 things before the soldier can go out and fight. It's like, it doesn't work like that. Like life is always going to throw you curveballs. So let's get ourselves less reliant on these tactics than not to be able to achieve our normal goal. Yeah.
It's one of those things, again, so obvious. Like when you think about it and actually like, oh, is that moving me closer? Is it just performative? Probably. Is it, and who is it for? Because you're probably by yourself, right? When you're going about those routines, but having the awareness to say like, is this moving me closer to the end goal? I think is super important. And then when you start to do that, like you said, you're kind of identifying these things, and then is this real? Is it not? Then getting into the research, breaking it down for doing that, like, do you have a framework for how you think about this? Because I'm curious, like, we all encounter these things many times throughout the day. And especially when it comes to health and nutrition and wellness, which is there's so many dogmatic this and you're the right way, the wrong way. And, you go on Twitter and it's just people debating whether zone two is best, whether it's this, whether it's the carnivore diet, whether it's paleo, you name it. Do these kind of things just appear to you kind of naturally as you're thinking about the different facets of life or performance or health? Or is there, like I said, a framework that you're like kind of dissecting things and you kind of know which ones you want to approach? Or maybe it's not even that much of a formula.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think I'll reiterate that like all this morning routine stuff that people do, like the behaviors in and of themselves are fine. The problem comes when we think that they're going to help us have these superpowers that apply to other things. I don't know if that exactly translates. I'll just give you an example how I think about this in my own life. I ask myself, what is my main goal? And my main goal is to write and write stuff that helps people live better. And so for me, like the best time for me to do that is the morning. If I insert a bunch of stuff in there, like I'm actually taking time away from my main goal. So I tend to figure out like, okay, when am I most productive at my number one goal? Let's keep that time like fixed on that. And I can do my wellness stuff later in the day. Now, someone who was like, my best time is from 8 p.m. to midnight, they would want to keep that time well and then put their wellness stuff that they thought kept them healthier in general earlier in the day. If that makes sense. And yeah, keeping away from the superstition stuff where if we think we do one thing, we can do another, but if one thing doesn't happen, then we're screwed for another. Like that just makes people fragile. You don't want people fragile. You want to basically be able to go if there's a gun going off next to you.
It's funny. So much of what we're talking about, I think it's been written about before, but I personally think about it, which is like the fitness piece, the running piece, the physical activity, suffering in so many ways translates directly to writing and research. And this ability to, with fitness, right? It's like, oh, you have to do this program, you have to be at the gym at this time, you have to have taken all these supplements in this kind of superstitious way to do your workout, and in some ways performative. And going through the process of writing, I think, well, I'll just speak for myself. I won't speak for everybody else. But like when you first start out, you're like, no, I have to like have my setup and I have to have done this and all these, and I need a special pen or paper or tablet, like whatever you're doing. And ultimately, no, what you want to do is just get to the place where anywhere, anytime, yes, it would be, I'm the same way. In the morning, I'm using that kind of sacred time to do the writing and research. But if need be, I'll do it outside, I'll do it in a hotel, I'll do it wherever it needs to be to get done, to have that kind of flexibility to do the hard work. Do you think about that as well? Do you have that kind of same experience, the translating between all the other ways you're conditioning yourself to be maybe hardened, set, like comfortable being uncomfortable, and then ultimately like doing the hard thing?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you just want to be able to you want to be able to accomplish your goal no matter the conditions you find yourself in, because you're always going to find yourself in unoptimal conditions. If you need everything quote unquote optimized, like you're going to get that like maybe 2-3 days a week. And then the other times you're going to fall apart if you're really believing that. Right. So I think we want to get people to the point, like I have to do all kinds of traveling for my work for this last book. Like I went into the Bolivian jungles. I went to Baghdad. Like I'm still writing every day. If I'm like, oh, you think I can go down to the street corner in Baghdad and be like, yo, do you have any athletic greens? I can't write until I have athletic greens. Like, no, you can't do that. We need to like learn how to be resilient. And I'm not saying that like everyone does this, but there's definitely a subset of people, and they could just be the loud people online where people do get into debates about these like very small minutia that probably just don't even matter in a free living environment. It's like people will debate, should you have like zero point 0.7 grams of protein or zero point 0.8 grams of protein per pound body weight. And it's like, we're talking about like 3 bites of chicken here. Do you think that really matters in the real world? Like, come on, you know? So it's, yeah, we live in a strange world. And like, I understand why people want certainty. Like, humans evolved to avoid uncertainty. Like we want to know, we want specifics. We want certainty. So I totally understand. and why we want that. But I don't think it always serves us. I think in a world where we
Mm.
have an abundance of information that is conflicting, I think it just drives people nuts.
There's that also happening with kind of circling back to the technology piece of all this. I think, a lot of times the conversation now centers on like screens and social media, right? We're spending too much time in front of screens. We're spending too much time on social media, especially kids. Obviously, a lot of what you write about and a lot of what we talked about today is like, well, if you're just going outside and you're being physically active and you're spending more time in nature, you're automatically disconnecting. You're automatically removing yourself from that. And it's hugely important. And it goes back to the importance of play and getting your hands dirty, which you also talk about. And even something as simple as like gardening, right? All the benefits that come from that. But curious to hear how you think about it with like the loudest voices online as well. It seems like is like AI's taking over. Everything's gonna be like transhuman robots. How do you kind of wrestle with what the future holds and just like innovation continues, infinity? Like I kind of think to myself, like, I want to go the other way. I want to go outside. I want to go kind of as far away from that as possible. How do you think it plays out to the extent that you've thought about it thus far?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're ever gonna, at least in my lifetime, get to a point where people don't have to do a lot of the stuff I talk about in my book to be healthy. I mean, we're always gonna have like we're not gonna get exercise in the pill. We're just biology is just way too complex. Just way too complex. Hopefully in the future. Yeah, I think it's always gonna come back to sort of the basic stuff that we know works. I don't necessarily think that the more, especially in the last 20 years, 30 years, I think that the more of that stuff we've gotten, the more mental health has suffered. Even if we do get exercise in the pill in 5 years, it's like, great, we're all jacked, but we all are depressed. So I think that, we need to find, and I think that, there's no one answer. We know that like if you want to improve your health, probably exercise is the most powerful lever you can pull. At the same time, I don't think that telling people they have to do one very specific type of exercise for a certain amount of time is true or helpful. I think it's like if you think about it, it's like let's get people exercising. Do whatever you want. Oh, you want to get a little more specific about what you should do? Okay, then let's go there. You want to get even more specific? Then let's go there. And like eventually you land on something that probably makes sense. And then you go past it and you get into crazy stuff. But
Yeah, it's every so often I find myself there too, where you're just like pushing it a little bit harder, pushing it a little bit harder, and then something breaks, right? You get injured, you get sick, and you're like, probably probably took it a little bit too far. And then you come back to the basics, the bottom of that pyramid, and you're just like, okay, spending more time outside, being consistent, showing up every day, like compounding over time. The basics are always where it's at. Maybe a few more questions before we get you out of here. So, kind of one thing that I thought was pretty powerful, and I started trying to think about how to implement this. Like you mentioned, obviously the kind of hunting trip as this annual kind of experience or journey that you undertake where you're going to go and kind of embrace that discomfort and get back to some of the basics that we're talking about, and that aligns right super well with things like whether it's Bill Gates and like this idea of like a think week, right? He goes into a cabin in the woods with just books and does a bunch of research, or even more recently, maybe a little bit more clickbaity, right? Like Aaron Rodgers going into the darkness retreat and just sitting in pitch black for 3 or 4 days, implementing those into your life. Obviously, maybe a version of that. Also, like this rite of passage, like this experience, the hero's journey, like going out, doing something really hard and kind of coming back and being different for it. Maybe could you just talk about like this idea of having that challenge? Because I think it's also cool that whether it's Go Ruck to some extent does these challenges, right? Where it's basically inviting people to do this and even like a community type experience. I think maybe at times like Tough Mudder, Spartan Race, like they were trying to do that as well.
Mhm.
So just like how you think about that, and maybe if there's any other good examples, I'd be interested to hear.
Yeah, I think so. I write about this in the book about how in the past to get people to from point A to sort of point B in their life, where they were more, they were better contributors, they were more confident, they were more competent, we would often send them out to do rites of passage in nature. And this was usually a hard thing that felt well beyond their capability levels. And they would go out there and they would struggle and they would think that they were going to have to quit, but they wouldn't quit. And by not quitting, they would often learn something about themselves and return home a sort of better person, better able to help everyone around them. And that's an ancient story. You see it in the hero's journey, like, Joseph Campbell plotted all these ancient myths and he identified they all have these series of steps that he called the hero's or heroine's journey. And it's all the same. It's like a problem inserts itself into your life. You have this moment where you're like, I don't know if I'm going to do this. You thrust yourself into that sort of abyss of trying to tackle this problem, go on this quest. You struggle down there. You have a lot of doubt, but you do it and you come out the other side a new person. So I don't think we have that as much as we used to in the past. Probably the only place putting it to scale is like the military with boot camps and selection camps. And I think that has sort of lowered the overall, I would say, resilience of the average person. So you look at research on mental health, and on one hand, like the people who have had the most challenges in their life, like challenge after challenge after challenge, just all kinds of shit coming at them, they have bad rates of mental health. But on the other side, the people who have had no challenges have equally poor rates of mental health. That's insane. So basically, the people who have had some challenges, but not an overwhelming amount, they tend to have the best rates of mental health because they've learned from the experience and they can use that to guide them in the future. And so I think it makes a case for, as the world has gotten easier and more comfortable, I think sometimes doing something really hard once a year is a good way to sort of reset yourself or, learn something about yourself. Maybe learn that you're more capable than you thought you were.
It's huge. It's hugely important. I think this idea of kind of programming that into our life, because things, you lose focus on it, you get caught up in the day to day. Like you said, we get conditioned to just like go through the process and go through the steps. And so having that kind of time blocked out where you're going to go and you're going to push yourself and you're going to suffer and you're going to be uncomfortable. It's crazy important. And also, as you're talking about the hero's journey, it's also the, doing something that's hard, coming out on the other side. Sounds a lot like writing a book, I'd imagine, where you're kind of transformed. And I think with that, we'll actually get you out of here. Where would you point them to get the book? What's the best place to follow along? I know the newsletter, website. So yeah, plug everything you got.
Yeah, I would say, so the book is called The Comfort Crisis. It's available wherever. My newsletter, I send it out every week. It's called 2% Newsletter, and you can find it on my website, which is eastermichael.com.
Perfect. Listen, it was awesome chatting today. When the new book comes out, we'll have to have you back to chat about that as well. But yeah, all the links below. Definitely encourage people to buy it, read it, and kind of follow along with the newsletter.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate you not cutting off me when I was ranting about morning routines. So
one more thing before you head out. Help us spread the word. Take a minute to rate and review the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, or share this episode with a friend. And if you like conversations like this, you'll love the Fitt Insider newsletter. We send it every Tuesday. The link is in the description. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you back here next week.